Okay, so we've started up our live stream, and let me just get the live stream link for YouTube. And one more time. Okay, here it is. So if you wanted to check it out on YouTube, you can do so at the following link. And once again, we're going to be making pretty extensive use of the Online Python website, so you can access it from this link over here. Okay, so this is Hacker Frogs After School Python Programming Basics Part 5. This workshop is the 5th intro to Python programming, and during our last workshop, we learned about a few programming concepts through Python, including the following. Conditions. So conditions are used in programs to determine a program's course of action. They rely on the evaluation of Boolean statements to determine if certain instructions are performed or not. So you can see here that we've got our if statement, we've got our else statement. So if this is true, this statement here, password is equal to my secret password, then it's going to do this instruction, or else it's going to do the other instruction. So in this workshop, we're going to be covering the following topics. We're going to be talking about loops, programming loops in general. More specifically, we're going to be talking about the two types of loops that we'll encounter inside of Python. We're going to talk about the for loop and the while loop. As usual, if you're having any trouble with any of the materials or if you're having technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat and we'll try to help you out as soon as we can. So we're talking about programming loops, and programming loops are tools that programmers use to run the same instructions multiple times. Nico from YouTube chat says hello. Hello to you, Nico. We're just doing a class that is a few classes behind the adult class, and we're going over programming loops today. I think we did this one with you already, but you're free to sit in if you'd like. So programming loops, tools that programmers use to run the same instructions multiple times. So here we've got a loop, and it's going to run a number of times equal to this range. The range is equal to 4 numbers starting from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's going to iterate. So this item over here, it's going to print the item. So it first prints 0, and then it goes 1, and then 2, and then 3. And that's 4 numbers because we start counting from 0. So here the code repeats the instructions 4 times for each time the value of I is printed. The first time I is 0, then 1, 2, and 3. It stops before the number 4 because it started counting from 0. There are 2 major categories of loops in Python. There are for loops and while loops, and we're going to cover for loops first. So for loops are instructions that repeat for each item in a set. The loop stops after the instructions have been performed on all items in the set. So basically, for loops have a natural conclusion. For loops always run a number of times equal to the number of items in the set. So if you got a list with 4 items, then it's going to run 4 times. If you're going to iterate over a line in a file, for instance, it's going to run as many times as there are lines in that file. So any object that can be referenced by index can be used in a for loop, including strings. So over here we've got our, let's do a little bit of writing our own for loops. So over in the online Python over here, and once again, if you don't have the link, then I will provide the link in the chat. We're going to start writing a for loop. And so for instance, let's just try the for loop that we did in the introduction there. So for I in range, and this is a function over here. So the range function is going to return a list of numbers, and the list of numbers can be any number of numbers. So you could do a range for 3 numbers, or a range for 10 numbers, or a range for 100 numbers. It doesn't matter. So in here, we're going to do for I in range, we're going to print We're going to print I. So that's all this loop is going to do. It's going to print the list of numbers, 10 of them, and each time it loops over, it's going to print that number. So if we run, let's see if we can get rid of, we got rid of the ads. Well, some of the ads anyways. Okay, so this is all we need here for I in range 10, colon, and then indented on the second line, print I in the parentheses. So if we run this, it's going to print out these 10 numbers over here, and then it's going to stop. So remember that this variable over here, I, this is something that this is a variable that's only used inside of this loop, and the variable stands for each item in the loop. So I could stand for item, but you could rename I if you like. So you could call this number, and then in here you would also call this number, and it's going to do the same thing. But in most of the cases, we just call the item that's being iterated over in the loop, we call it I. But you could call it something else. You could call it number, and it does the same thing. You could also call this hamburger if you really wanted to. But you just need to make sure that the variable name is the same inside the loop. Okay? All right, so let's move on. So any object that can be referenced by index can be used in a loop, including strings. So we've got this this animal over here, and it's equal to frog. The string is frog. In this case, if we do for I in animal, it's going to print I, and in this case, I is equal to each letter. So on Twitch, Asadox says, "Hey, Asadox, we're doing our Python class right now. We're doing our Python class about loops. If you want to stick around and learn about Python loops, you can sit in if you like." Okay, so let's do a little demonstration. Does anybody know a really long word? What's the longest word that we can think of? So let's just ChatGPT. What is a really long word in English? Okay, one of the longest words in English is, what is this? Okay, so we've got a user suggestion over here, and that is user D. User D says, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And I think, so I don't think I can copy that from the chat, but I can ask ChatGPT for, actually I can Google this. Mary Poppins long word. Okay, this one right here. So let's just copy this, and then let's go back to our code, and we're going to set our long word. So long underscore word equals supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And I think it means something like something whimsy or something fun. And what we can do is we can do a for loop. So let's just call these letters. For letter in long word. User D says I need, user PK says you need the link. So this is the link for online Python, and if you want to get the spelling for this word right here, then you can follow this link, and it's going to be the first one over here. You can copy it, and then you can put it in your code. So over here, for letter in long word, colon, we're going to print the letter. So this is a pretty simple for loop, and all it's going to do is going to print each one of these letters out. And if we run this, then it's going to print out each one of these letters down here. So I want you to give that a try. If you're having trouble, let us know. But if you're able to print out the super long word, please type in the chat super long word smiley face. If you can print out the super long word using the for loop over here. Once again, if you need to get the super long word supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, you can always follow the Google link and copy it from there. All right, user D has printed out the super long word. Great to see. Once again, let me provide that to the other online chats, as well as the website that we're using to practice our Python. Okay, so long word is this. For letter in long word, colon, and then on the next line, indent, print, letter. So that's all we need to do to print out each letter in the long word over here. Okay, so let's move on. So this is an explanation about how to write for loops. So we just so to clarify, to write a for loop, we begin with the for keyword, then a variable name that is only used inside the loop, typically the letter I, and then in, and then the name of the object to be iterated over, and then a colon. On the next line, we have to indent the line 4 spaces, and then input the instructions to be run. Since a loop is in a code block, all lines in the loop must be indented. So all for loops iterate over the contents of an object, typically a list. In fact, the range function creates a list with a series of numbers depending on the arguments given to it. So that was for loops, but we're going to, I guess we can consider while loops to be the more complicated version of the loop in Python, and the other type of loop is the while loop, and which, unlike the for loop, does not have an assumed end condition. So while loops are going to run, they actually don't, they're not going to automatically run. They need a trigger condition to run. And so let's explain. So we've got this count variable, it's equal to 0, and while the count is less than 3, then it's going to print the count, and then count is going to go up by 1. So what this is going to do is it's going to print 3 numbers. So first the count is 0, and it's going to print out 1, then it's going to print out 2, and then it's going to print out 3. Each time the loop comes back around, it's going to check this condition right here. So the condition here is count is less than 3. So it checks the first time, count is 0, so it runs. And then the next time it's 1, so it runs. And then it's 2, then it runs. But when count becomes 3, it's going to check if count is less than 3, and it's going to come back false. So because it comes back false, then the loop is going to terminate. So the loop keeps running until the count variable is no longer less than 3. And each iteration of the loop prints the value of the count, and then increases the value of count by 1. So this last line over here is going to move the loop towards a condition where the loop is going to end. So this plus equals means that it's going to increase the value of the current value of the count by 1. So we can see that while loops and if conditionals are very closely related because each time a while loop iterates, it checks if its running condition is still true and ends if the statement is false. So in the example, the loop runs over and over again while the statement is applied to it remains true. Once the count variable is incremented to 3, then count is less than 3 returns false and the loop ends. So let's try running this simple while loop. So in our So let's just get rid of this, and then while, oh, we need to initialize our count outside. So count is going to equal to 0 up here in line 1, and then in line 3, while count less than 3, print count, and then print count, and then count plus equals 1, which means that count is going to go up by 1. Is this all we need for this one? Let me check. Yeah, that's all we need for this one. Okay, so let's try running this script. So it prints out 0, then 1, then 2. Everybody, I want you to give this a try. So on line 1, count equals 0. Then on line 3, while count less than 3, colon. Then hit return, print count, count plus equals 1. So if you're able to loop out those 3 numbers using the while loop, please type in the chat, while loop, smiley face. Some flavor in YouTube chat, hello. Hello to you, Some Flavor. We're just doing a Python lesson right now. We're learning about doing loops in Python. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and stick around. All right, so user D has done the while loop, and user LL also did the while loop. Great to see, great to see. All right, so what we can actually, so this prints out 0 and then 1 and then 2. So why doesn't it print out 3? So can you tell me why it doesn't print out 3? So 3 is not printed out. Okay, so user PK has finished the super long word exercise. Thank you very much. And users D and LL says because it starts at 0. So if we counted from 1, it's still not going to count to 3. So the question is, why doesn't it print out the number 3? So the answer is it doesn't print out the number 3 because each time it comes back around, it checks if the count is less than 3. When it becomes 3, then count less than 3 is false, and it doesn't, then it's going to shut down the loop. It's going to break out of the loop, rather. So that's why 3 is never printed out in this case. Okay, so let's move on. So we begin a while loop with the word while, and then the statement that must evaluate true for the loop to execute, then the colon. So while count less than 3, colon. Then on the next line we have to indent 4 spaces, then input the loop instructions. Typically, the last loop instruction progresses a variable towards a state where the loop condition will return false. So if we don't do this step over here, then something really bad is going to happen. So in fact, let's take a look over here. So if we leave this instruction out, it says while count less than 3, print count. So if we run this loop, what's going to happen? Can anybody predict what's going to happen if we run this code? So count equals 1, while count less than 3, print count. What's going to happen if we run this code? So count equals, so user LL says it'll print to 3. It's not going to print until 3 because count never changes. So there's nothing in the code that indicates that the value of count is going to change. So count is always 1. And while count is less than 3, it's going to print 1. It's going to print 1, and then the next time it's going to print 1, and the next time it's going to print 1. Because there's no condition that's going to progress the loop towards the end of the loop. So if we click on this, and I need to be careful, it's just going to keep on printing 1 until the end of time, unless you stop it. Because there's nothing that that changes, there's nothing that progresses the loop towards an end state. So that's something we have to keep in mind too. We're going to talk about infinite loops in a second. So infinite loops. What happens if a while loop is coded in such a way where the Boolean statement will never return false? The loop will never naturally end and creates what is called an infinite loop. So you might have heard the term infinite loop somewhere, but infinite loops are bad news generally, because if you have an infinite loop in your program, that means that the program is going to get stuck. So here we've got count equals 1, while count is not 0, then it's going to print the count, and then count is going to go up by 1. So what can you predict is going to happen if we run this loop right here? Count is 1, while count is not 0, print the count, and then count. Some flavor in YouTube chat says yes, because 1 is less than 1 and count is 1. Less than 3. Count is less than 3. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that's why that was an infinite loop in that case. So this is the infinite loop right here. Count is going to keep on going up because count goes up each time the loop runs. But because the end condition is flawed, so count will never be 0 because count starts at 1. So this is an infinite loop because it's just going to keep on going up. And in fact, let's just simulate this real fast. So count 1, while count is not 0, print count, and then count plus equals 1. So the count keeps on going up, but the loop will never stop. So let's try running this. Okay, so it just kept on going up and printing out the number, and it managed to get to 38,732 before we stopped it. But this is an infinite loop right here. So although there are cases where programmers want to create infinite loops in their programs, unintentional infinite loops effectively halt program execution and lead to system memory issues, crashes, and other problems. So basically, anytime you have an infinite loop that you didn't intend to put in, that's really bad. So we're going to talk about the break statement. And the break statement is an instruction that we can insert into programming loops. When executed, the break instruction is going to terminate execution of the current loop. So this is another way we can code in a stop to our while loops over here. So let's take a look at this code. So count equals 0, and then we've got while true. So while true is just kind of is a way of telling Python that we want to do this loop infinitely. So while true is an infinite loop. It's going to print the count, and then count is going to go up by 1. So each time the loop goes, the count is going to increase by 1. If the count is exactly equal to 4, then we give the break instruction and the loop ends. So let's demonstrate this. So here, instead of while something something, we'll just do while true. And then we're going to print the count. The count goes up by 1. If count is exactly equal to 4, break. Okay, so try to copy this code over here. While true, print count. Count plus equals 1. If count is equal to 4, then break. If you're having trouble writing the code, then let us know what error shows up when you try to run it. But when you run this code, it's going to print out 4 times. 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. So try this out. And if you manage to run this successfully, type in the chat break. So also keep in mind that, so while true, line 3, on line 4, you have to indent. On line 5, you have to indent. On line 6, it's going to start a new code block. So on line 7, you have to indent twice. So on 7, it's 2 indents. Okay, LL, got the break. Great to see, great to see. So another question to everybody here is, why does 4 not print? So count starts at 0, it goes up, but we only counted until 3. Why didn't 4 print out? Okay, yeah, that's because of the break. So this over here increased it from 3 to 4, and then count equals 4, and then it breaks. But if we change this around, if we change this to count plus equals 1 at the bottom here, then we're going to print out 4. No, it's still not going to print out. Never mind, never mind. Anyways, if the count equals 4, then it's going to break. Yeah. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so this is an example of a while true style of loop, which is an infinite loop by default, and requires another means inserted within the loop to terminate the loop properly. For example, the break statement over here. So another keyword that we can use inside of loops is the continue statement. So the continue statement is an instruction that stops execution in the current loop and begins a new iteration of the loop. It differs from the break statement because it doesn't terminate the whole loop, just that one iteration of it. So each time the loop iterates, that's one cycle of the loop, the break statement is going to break the whole loop. But the continue statement is just going to break that one cycle of the loop, that one iteration. So we've got this code over here, for I in range 5. So these are numbers 0 to 4. And here, if I modulo 2 is equal to 1. So basically we're checking if the number is odd. We're checking if the number is odd. If it is odd, we're going to break out of this loop and go back to the beginning of the loop. But if it's an even number, then this is not going to trigger, and then it's going to print this number is an even number. So it's going to do 0 is an even number, 2 is an even number, 4 is an even number. So let's try this out. Get rid of all this. For I in range 5, if I modulo 2 equals 1. So remember, when we're writing these statements and we're comparing, we have to use the double equal sign over here. And this continue keyword is basically going to make the loop go back up to the top. But if this does not happen, it's going to print with, we're going to use the F strings over here. And in the squiggly brackets, I is an even number. Okay, so let's try running this code. What this should do is every time I is an even number, it's going to skip, and then every time I is an odd number, every time it's an odd number, it's going to skip, and every time it's an even number, it's going to continue to this print instruction and print that this number is an even number. So let's try running this. Oh. Sorry. Okay. So I did a syntax error over here. So for I in range, and remember this is a code block, and you have to use the colon over here for the code block. So, but the rest of this should be okay. So let's run this. So it says 0 is an even number, 2 is an even number, 4 is an even number. Okay. So everybody try this out. If you're able to get this to work, please type continue in the chat. And user LL, very quick, very quick. But we could do any number. So we could put this in range 100, and we get a lot of output out of this. So it's going to tell us every time it's an even number. We can run it, and it tells us even every time that that the number is even over here. Great. Okay. So the else clause. We talked about the else clause in the previous class, and just as we can use if conditionals within loops, we can use the else clause to execute instructions in case that if condition returns false. So this is very similar to the code we used previously. So if I modulo 2 is equal to 0, we're going to print it's an even number, or else we're going to print it's an odd number. So we can actually change this. We can change our own code in this editor over here. And we can change this from continue to print this is an odd number. And then we can do the else clause here, print is an even number. Okay, so in this case, it's going to take all the numbers from 1 to 100, and then it's going to check if it's an odd number, and it's going to print it's an odd number. If it's not an odd number, it's going to print it's an even number. So let's run this, and it tells us if each number is an odd number or an even number. Okay. So let's do our So the programming loops exercise in learnpython.org, I don't like it very much. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple more examples from that I designed on my own over here. So let's do our end of session exercise code at the bottom over here. Everybody take a look at the GitHub page, and I'm providing the GitHub page in the chat. And what I want you to do is I want you to navigate to the bottom of the page over here, and under this section over here called end of session exercise code, I want you to click on this box over here. So there's going to be some code, and there's a box over here on the right hand side of the screen. Just click on it. It's going to copy all the code. After you've done that, go over to your online Python editor here, and then highlight all the code you already have there, delete it, then paste in the code that you just copied. So let's go over this code. So first of all, the program it's gonna print this message. So this program will take a series of integers, then tell us if each integer is an even number or an odd number. And then we're going to define a numbers string variable. It's going to equal input. So the input is basically user input. It's going to ask the user to enter a series of integers separated by spaces. For example, 1, 92, 35. And then on the next line, it's going to turn this into a list. So it turns it into a list by using the split method for strings, and it's going to split it by the spaces. So each time it's a space, it's going to separate that item into an object. So, and then we're going to do a for loop. So for I in the number list, if I, the integer I, modulo 2 is equal to 0, it's going to print out that this is an even number, or else it's going to print that this is an odd number. Okay, so try running this, and it's going to ask you to enter a series of integers separated by spaces. So you can put in whatever numbers you like and separate them by spaces. You can make them as long as you like. You can make them gags. You can make them as whatever you like, as long as they're all integers. That is, there are no decimal places. This also doesn't work if you put in any letters. So you're going to get an error if you put in stuff that aren't integers. After you're done, hit enter. And then it's going to tell you if each one of these numbers is an even number or an odd number. Okay? So if you manage to successfully run the program, please type in the chat, I looped the numbers, smiley face. Okay, users D and LL, they looped the numbers, great to see. Okay, so if you have any questions about loops, then please type them in the chat. I'll try to answer the best I can. But I think we've got some questions. We've got a little quiz to do. So here, we've got 3 questions about programming loops. So think about what you learned in this session about loops and answer this question. When will the programming loop end? So we got my list. This is a list for the number in my list. Print the number. And then my list, we're going to append the number plus 1. We're going to add to the list. So is it going to end A, after the last number in the list is printed, B, after the number 3 is printed, or C, this loop will never end? So the first thing it does is print the number, and then it's going to add a number to the list. Okay, user LL says it's C, and the answer is C. This loop will never end. So the problem with this loop is that you're adding to the list that's being iterated over. So each time one number is being printed out and then one number is being added. So the loop is just going to keep on going and it's never going to end. So question number 2. When will this programming loop end? While true, the count is equal to 0. Then we print the count, and then count equals count plus 1. So count equals count plus 1 is basically adding 1 to the count. If count is equal to 3, then we're going to break out of the loop. So is it going to end after the number 2 is printed, after the number 3 is printed, or this loop will never end? Okay, so I think, so you all answered that the answer is A. So the actual answer is this loop will never end. So the problem is this. So first thing that's done is the count is set to 0. Then we print the count. Then count is added, so count is going to increase by 1. If the count is 3, it's going to break. Then it goes back up to the top. It sets the count to 0. So because the count exists inside of the loop, this loop will never end because each time we go up to the top, the count goes to 0. So basically what this does is that it prints the number 0 over and over again, and each time the loop starts up, it's going to set the count to 0. So the count will never become 3. So that's why this loop will never end. Okay, so the last question, when will this programming loop end? Count is equal to 0. While count is less than 5, it's going to print the count, and then count equals count plus 1. So in this case, the count exists outside of the loop. While count is less than 5, print the count. Count equals count plus 1. Does this end A, after the number 4 is printed, B, after the number 5 is printed, or C, this loop will never end? Okay, so we've got one person that says it is A, one person that says it is C. The answer is A, after the number 4 is printed. So this is a proper loop. So as soon as the count becomes 5, then count is less than 5 is going to become false, and then this is going to shut down. So the last number that's printed is the number 4. Okay. All right, so we've got a little bit of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to try solving a challenge in picoctf. So picoctf, let's see. So the first thing we need to do to start up picoctf is we need to log into our web shell. So let's go over to picoctf, and let's get rid of my search over here. So picoctf is over here. Please log into your picoctf account and then open up your web shell. So to open up the web shell, you just go over to this button over here, web shell, click on it. And then that's going to start up your web shell session. If for some reason, after maybe 10 seconds, the web shell session doesn't start, you're going to need to try again. So you're going to need to close out the window and then click on the web shell button again. And if it still doesn't work, then you're going to need to do the same thing again. Or I think you might be able to use the reload web shell terminal button. But eventually it's going to work, and then you're going to get into your web shell. But this is the small web shell. We want the big one. So the big web shell can be accessed through this button right here, pop out web shell terminal. So just click on that. And that's going to make your web shell in its own browser tab. So if you manage to put your web shell in its own browser tab and it's nice and big, please type in the chat, web shell up, smiley face. If you need a little bit of time to log into your picoctf, then please let us know in the chat and we'll wait up for you a little bit. Once you're in your web shell, you probably want to clear the screen and take a look at what's in your directory. If there's something in your directory already, you probably want to delete it, just so you can keep your web shell nice and tidy. So it would be rm space -r and then the name of the file or directory you want to delete. We want to keep the readme.txt file in here, but everything else, that can go. Okay, user LL, no problem. If you're having computer problems, then maybe you can try it out after the session is over. But which challenge are we doing today? So everybody, we're going to be go ahead and take a look at the GitHub over here. We're going to be doing the Serpentine challenge. So you can go ahead and copy the link. Sometimes the picoctf website is a bit slow. Let's see if I can search this. Serpentine. You can reload the page as well. Okay, here we go. So this is the Serpentine challenge. It says find the flag in the Python script. So we've got a Python script over here, this link. So all we need to do is highlight the link and then right click on it, select copy link. If for some reason you let me copy this link and put it in the chat for the people who want to just click on the link in the chat. Okay. So, like I said, you have to highlight the download link and select copy link, then go over to the web shell. In the web shell, if this web shell session ended, you can press the enter button to reconnect. Okay. So this is the Serpentine challenge. We're going to make a directory so we can work inside of it. Serpentine, and then we're going to enter the directory, Serpentine, and then afterwards we can download the file. So to download the file, we use the wget command and then space, and then paste in the file link, then hit enter. After that, you're going to see the serpentine.py file in your directory. So if you've managed to get this far, please type in the chat, I DL'd the file. So does anybody know what program we can use to read this serpentine.py file? So we could use one of two different programs to read this file. Okay, so we could use user LL Python. We can use the Python file to run the program, to run the script, but to read the script we would use the nano program. But in fact, we should probably try running this program first. So let's try using Python. So it's going to be Python, then space, then the name of the file. So ser, and then hit tab to autocomplete, and that's going to autocomplete the file name for you. So over here, the program runs. It says, welcome to the Serpentine Encourager. Print encouragement is A, B is print flag, and C is quit. So if we do A, it says keep it up. If we do A again, it says look how far you've come. And if we do B to print the flag, it says oops, I must have misplaced the print flag function. Check my source code. So we can check the source code, but first we have to quit. So hit C and then enter. That's going to quit out of the program. So to edit so what program do we use to edit the file? If your answer is nano, then you're correct. So we're going to use the nano text editor. So it's nano and then the name of the file, serpentine.py, hit enter. And then we're going to see the code. So this is Python code right here. So you don't need to understand everything that's going on inside this Python code. But at the top over here, it's going to import a couple of libraries into this code. So it's got a random library and a sys library. So we don't need to know too much about this, and we also don't need to know too much about this function right here. So we're going to talk more about creating our own functions in a later class, but this is how we create a function. This kind of code right here, def, is going to make a function. We don't need to know about this. We do need to pay attention to this function right here, And this function right here is called print flag. So we want the program to print the flag. So to run this print flag function, all we need to do is type in the code after it's been defined, print underscore flag with these two parentheses. So down at the bottom over here, we've got our main function. First, it prints out the snake, and then it's going to ask us to put in one of these three options, A, B, and C. So we see here, if the choice is A, it's going to run this print encouragement function, or else if the choice is B, then it's going to print, oops, I've misplaced the print flag function. So what we want to do is we want to replace this code right here. So choice B, we want it to do the print flag function. So just erase all the code in here. And then we want to do the print flag function, print underscore flag, and then these two parentheses. So this is going to run the print flag function if we choose the letter B. Okay, UF. User UF, thank you very much. And the rest of this we can keep the same. So all we need to do is save out this file. Does anybody know which keyboard shortcut we use to save the file? So to save the file in Nano, we need to use the Control-X keyboard shortcut. So hit Control, hold down Control on your keyboard, and then hit the X button. It's going to ask us if you want to save the modified buffer, that is to save the file. Press Y for yes, and then hit Enter to confirm. Okay, so after that, you can just run Python serpentine.py again. So we've modified this. We've modified the script. Now, when we do the print flag option over here, type B, enter, and then it prints out the flag over here because we put in for option B the print flag function. So to finish the exercise, all we need to do is copy the flag over here, copy the whole flag over here. Right-click, copy, then go back to the challenge description page. On the challenge description page here at the bottom, paste in your flag, and then click on Submit Flag. And then you're done. Okay, so if you managed to complete the challenge, please type in the chat, I modded the code. Smiley face. All right, so let's take a minute to do the summary of today's class, and then we'll end the class. So let's review the programming concepts we learned in this workshop. User D modded the code. Great to see, great to see. Programming loops. Loops are tools that programmers use to run the same instructions multiple times. So loops can either run a preset number of times before terminating, or iterate through all items in a list or string in the case of for loops, or run continuously until a predetermined trigger state is achieved in the case of while loops. So what's next? In the next Hacker Frogs After School Programming Workshop, we're going to continue learning Python with the learnpython.org website. And in the next workshop, topic is going to be functions. So we're going to finally learn how to write our own functions in Python. It's going to be a fun class, so I hope to see you there. And for everybody that's watching on the live stream, we're going to be just taking a minute or two to finish out on the Zoom session. So we're going to go to a be right back screen. So we'll be right back in a couple of minutes. And afterwards, we're going to be doing some free hacking against the Vulnix website. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.